There's something almost mysterious about Cillian Murphy, a man who never chased fame, yet somehow became one of the most unforgettable faces in modern cinema, and his journey doesn't begin with red carpets or flashing cameras, but in a quiet corner of Ireland where dreams felt distant and success seemed reserved for someone else. Yet what makes his story powerful is not just the success he achieved, but the way he achieved it. Slowly, silently, and with an intensity that most people overlook, because before the world knew him as the cold, calculated Thomas Shelby or the haunting presence in films that stay with you long after they end, he was simply a young man experimenting with music, unsure of his path, even rejecting opportunities that many would grab instantly. And that alone tells you something rare about him. He was never desperate, never loud, never trying to fit into the system. Instead, he built his own rhythm, his own pace, and that's exactly why his story hits differently, because in a world where everyone is rushing, he chose to wait, to grow, to refine himself, and that patience became his greatest weapon. His early days were filled with uncertainty, performing in small theaters, taking roles that didn't promise fame but offered something far more valuable: experience, depth, and the chance to truly understand the craft. And while others chased visibility, he chased authenticity, and this is where most people fail. They want the spotlight without building the foundation, but Cillian Murphy did the opposite. He built such a strong foundation that when the spotlight finally found him, he was already uncheckable. And then came the turning point, the kind of moment that changes everything. When he stepped into roles that demanded not just acting but transformation, roles that required him to disappear completely and become someone else. And he didn't just act, he immersed himself so deeply that audiences couldn't separate the character from the man. And that's when people started noticing, not because he was loud, but because he was undeniable. His performances didn't scream for attention, they pulled you in quietly, almost hypnotically. And before you realized it, you were completely hooked. And this is the power of subtle excellence, something that's rare in today's world where everything is exaggerated, and yet Cillian Murphy proved that you don't need to be the loudest person in the room to be the most powerful. Sometimes silence, focus, and precision can make a much bigger impact. And as his career evolved, he continued to choose roles that challenged him rather than comforted him. He avoided being typecast, avoided the easy path, and instead kept pushing boundaries, constantly reinventing himself. And that's a lesson most people ignore. Growth doesn't happen in comfort. It happens in discomfort, in the unknown, in the risk of failure, and he embraced that fully. And then came the role that changed everything on a global scale. The moment when he became a household name, not just an actor, but a symbol of intensity and control. And yet, even then, he didn't let fame change him. He stayed grounded, private, almost distant from the chaos of celebrity culture. And that's another reason his story stands out, because he didn't let the world define him. He defined himself. He chose what to accept, what to reject, and how to live his life. And that level of control is something most people never achieve, because they get lost in expectations, in pressure, in the need to please others. But Cillian Murphy stayed true to himself, and that authenticity became his signature. And as years passed, his performances only became stronger, deeper, more refined, proving that success isn't a peak, it's a continuous journey, a process of evolution, and he never stopped evolving, never settled, never became complacent. And that's the difference between temporary success and lasting legacy. One fades, the other grows stronger with time. And what makes his journey truly inspiring is that it's not built on luck or shortcuts. It's built on discipline, patience, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. And that's something anyone can learn from, because you don't need to be born extraordinary to achieve something extraordinary. You just need to be consistent, focused, and willing to put in the work even when no one is watching, even when there's no guarantee of success, because that's where real growth happens. In the unseen moments, in the quiet struggles, in the times when giving up feels easier than continuing, and yet you choose to continue just like he did. And that's why his story resonates so deeply, because it's not just about acting, it's about mindset, about the power of staying true to your path, even when the world tries to pull you in different directions. And if there's one thing you take from his journey, let it be this: you don't need to rush, you don't need to chase validation, you don't need to follow the crowd, you need to build yourself, your skills, your discipline, your focus, and trust that when the time is right, the world will notice, just like it noticed Cillian Murphy, not because he demanded attention, but because he earned it. And as the world began to recognize Cillian Murphy not just as an actor but as a force of quiet intensity, his journey entered a phase where expectations grew heavier, where every role carried the weight of his previous brilliance. And this is where most people crumble, not at the beginning when no one is watching, but at the moment when everyone is, when pressure replaces freedom and fear of failure starts whispering louder than ambition. Yet what makes his story even more powerful is how he handled that pressure. He didn't try to outdo himself in a loud or desperate way. He didn't chase bigger explosions or louder performances. Instead, he went deeper, more controlled, more precise, almost as if he understood that true mastery isn't about doing more. It's about doing better, and that shift is what separates amateurs from legends, because anyone can rise once, but maintaining that level, evolving beyond it, that requires something rare, something internal, something that can't be faked, and you can see it in the choices he made. Working with visionary directors like Christopher Nolan, who himself is known for complexity and depth, and together they created moments in cinema that didn't just entertain but stayed with people, made them think, made them feel something real, something lasting. And this collaboration wasn't built on chance. It was built on trust, on consistency, on the kind of dedication that doesn't fluctuate with mood or circumstance. And that's a powerful lesson in itself, because in life, the relationships you build through reliability and excellence often become the doors to your greatest opportunities. And as Murphy continued forward, he stepped into roles that demanded complete transformation, physically, mentally, emotionally, pushing himself into spaces that many actors avoid because they are uncomfortable, because they expose vulnerability, and yet he embraced that exposure, understanding that vulnerability is not weakness but strength, that showing depth, showing layers, is what connects with people on a human level. And that's exactly why his performances feel so real, because they come from a place of honesty, not performance for the sake of applause. And when you look at his journey, you realize something important. He never tried to be everywhere. He never tried to dominate every headline. Instead, he chose selective presence, meaningful work over constant visibility. And in today's world where people confuse being busy with being impactful, that approach feels almost rebellious. But it's also incredibly effective, because when he appears, it matters. When he performs, it resonates. And that's the power of intentional living, doing less but doing it with full focus and purpose. And then came one of the most defining chapters of his career, the moment when years of discipline, patience, and quiet growth culminated into a performance that not only captured global attention but redefined how people saw him. And it wasn't sudden, it wasn't overnight. It was the result of years of unseen effort, of saying no to the wrong opportunities, of staying committed when results were slow. And that's something most people struggle with. They want immediate results, immediate recognition, but real success doesn't work like that. It builds slowly, almost invisibly, until one day it becomes undeniable. And that's exactly what happened with Cillian Murphy. His success wasn't loud, it was inevitable, and that's a powerful difference. Because when success is inevitable, no one can take it away from you. It's built on something solid, something real. And even as he reached heights that many only dream of, he remained grounded, distant from the noise, focused on the work rather than the attention. And that level of discipline is rare, especially in an industry that constantly pulled people toward distraction, toward validation, toward comparison. But he stayed in his lane, focused on his craft. And that's why his story isn't just inspiring, it's instructive. It shows you that you don't need to follow the typical path to succeed. You can move quietly, you can grow steadily, you can build something meaningful without constantly announcing it to the world. And in fact, that might be the most powerful way to do it, because when your work speaks for you, you don't need to speak as much. And as his journey continues, one thing becomes clear: this isn't a story about fame, It's a story about mastery, about becoming so good at what you do that recognition becomes a byproduct rather than a goal. And that's a mindset shift that can change everything. Because when you stop chasing attention and start chasing excellence, you move differently. You think differently?